sense that this building meant something, not just to the Jewish community, but to the larger state and even to the country as a place where so much history was captured. And I was just talking to someone who had been on a tour many years ago, and one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this building, I've worked at this museum now 13 years, is that our understanding of the building's history is constantly changing, and we're constantly learning new things. So those of you who may have been on a tour even like 5 or 6 years ago might hear new things that are very different from what I may have told you 5 or 6 years ago, even just the color of the building. In 2010, we embarked on a major project to restore the building. After we were able to recover some of the original paint samples, and through some analysis, learned that in fact, called Baltimore Hebrew Congregation, which was the very first congregation to be founded in the state of Maryland. They worshiped in some spaces that were not official buildings and formal spaces. I was talking to someone whose daughter works in the building at their earliest home, not too far from here in Fells Point. But by 1845, the community had grown, the congregation had become so large that they decided to make this important step to create an official building. So they hired a very prominent architect, whose name is Robert Carey Long Jr., who built so many other impressive religious buildings, mostly churches, here in Baltimore, and he built this building, and he used a very official style, a Greek Revival style, which if you look at the outside, it really doesn't look like a religious institution. It looks more like a bank or government building, and it was a way that the congregation was really announcing their intent to officially enter mainstream American society. So Baltimore Hebrew was here from 1845 until 1889. They hired the first ordained rabbi to serve in an American synagogue. His name was Rabbi Abraham Rice. He came here, and he was not very happy with the state of Jewish life that he found here in this country. He did not stay at the congregation very long. When Baltimore Hebrew was founded, it was an Orthodox traditional synagogue. One of the things you may have noticed is that there's a balcony, and according to traditional law, men and women don't sit together. So whereas the men would be sitting in the seats where you're sitting, the women would have sat on the balcony. So it was a traditionally observant congregation. But what happened with a lot of these German Jewish immigrants who came here is that they found themselves wanting to modify some of the traditions that they had been brought up in. They wanted to become Americans. They wanted to keep their businesses open on Saturdays. And Rabbi Rice clashed a lot with his congregants. So he was only here from 1840 until 1849. This is not here very long. And we have in our possession these letters that he wrote home where he decries the state of Jewish life in America and really wonders if it could even take hold. So these are some really wonderful correspondence that we're fortunate to still have. So Rabbi Abraham Rice left in 1849, and the congregation slowly began moving away from its traditional roots. It wasn't though until the 1870s that they officially made some very big changes that led to a rupture in the congregation. One of the things they did was they purchased an organ, which is not something that you find in a traditional synagogue. They put it up in the balcony. They decided to let girls sing in what had been an all-boys choir, and according to traditional Jewish law, men and women don't sing together. In fact, your men are not supposed to listen to women singing. So this was a huge controversy. And this was for some of the founding members, this was it. This was like, we're not going to stay here anymore. We're going to leave. We want to maintain our traditional roots. So they got up and they left, and they built a brand new synagogue just on the other side of the museum, which they called Chizuk Emunah, which means strengthening the faith. So clearly they were kind of taking a dig at their fellow former congregants. And they worshipped it just right across the way, which is the other building that we own, but I don't think we'll have a chance to go in to see that one. So once some of those people left, the congregation sort of moved away from its traditional roots even further. Today, Baltimore Hebrew is still a very large synagogue, and Baltimore is now a Reformed synagogue, so it's clearly moved away from its Orthodox roots. They currently have a female rabbi who has been with them for a few years, so you kind of see how things kind of change. But by the 1880s, this neighborhood had changed dramatically, as you saw in the Voices of Lombard Street exhibit. And while new Eastern European immigrants were coming in, a lot of the German Jews who had initially arrived were ready to leave. They had come, they had as a whole really succeeded. A lot of these immigrants started out as peddlers and small business owners and made their businesses prospered. A lot of them opened up, clothing manufacturers, some of the early Jewish department stores in downtown Baltimore, and they wanted to leave behind the neighborhood where they had gotten their start, and so they moved to another neighborhood just northwest of here on Utah Place, where they built a very elite society with enormous synagogues that were very different in character from what they had left. Now, in many cases, a lot of the synagogues that were in this neighborhood were sold to big Jewish congregations who came from the Eastern European community. But in the case of the Lloyd Street Synagogue, it actually became home to a Catholic church, a Lithuanian parish. So for 15 years, this building was St. John the Baptist. And it's kind of hard to imagine, right? Synagogue, church. When I came here, we used to kind of gloss over the story of the church. We're like, well, they were only here a short period of time. They didn't do that much. And then they left. But we have since done quite a number of studies, and if you look up into the balcony, you can see there's a trap door in the ceiling. And one of the things we did is we hired an architectural historian of preservation to go up and to do some excavations and explorations up there, and they found the remnants of what would have been the bell tower and the steeple. So imagine, the Lloyd Street Synagogue had a steeple on it. And we haven't been able to find a photograph of it, but when we started to do some research, our staff, we actually did find records that the bell was actually blessed by Cardinal Gibbons in the ceremony. So really fascinating things we're continuing to learn about the building's history. So St. John's was here from 1889 to 1905. They then moved to 1905, and the building became a synagogue again. So synagogue, church synagogue, it became a Russian congregation, a very Orthodox congregation that went back to the traditional roots. See how it's changing back and forth. That was here from 1905 to the 1950s, and this synagogue made a lot of changes too. So one of the things we're constantly uncovering is how the building looked at different stages in its time period. Now, we do have some original artifacts. The pews you're sitting on, these are all original pews that have been here for a very long time. Some of you might be sitting. You can see there are these brass nameplates. We have one right here. These were from Baltimore Hebrew. These tell us that people were buying robes or buying pews for their families, and we actually have pew deeds where people were paying huge sums of money for the right to own these pews. So it tells us a lot about the prosperity of the families that worshipped here. But not much else that you're looking at dates to that early time period. Most of it dates to later time period. The bima, the central platform where the service is led, this is all from Shomer Mishmeret, which was the Russian congregation. This dates to them. When the building was first built, it wasn't as big as it is now. It ended right, you can see when you come up on the floorboard, right beyond the bima. But by 1860, the congregation had grown, so they expanded. So you see it's a constant, just the change, the growth. The stenciling on the walls that you see, this was all added in the 1990s by our museum. Now, as I said, we're constantly learning new things about the museum. And in the 1960s, when the building was purchased by the Jewish Historical Society in Maryland, Shomer Mishmeret went out of existence. By the 1950s, there really were no Jews living in this neighborhood anymore. They couldn't afford to put maintenance. So this was a time period when the city had stepped in with an offer to purchase the building to knock it down for a parking lot. So that's when our museum was founded and purchased the building. But in 1960, there was a very different notion of historic preservation. And so the people who worked in the building thought that by painting everything white and covering over there these beautiful murals on the ceiling that Shomer had painted, they were taking it back to times what they were calling a colonial style, which we have since learned it never actually looked like that. So in the 1990s, we embarked on some studies. The stenciling was the result of some of those studies, so we don't know exactly what it looked like in here in the 1845, but we sort of are thinking it might have looked something like that. The chandeliers that you see, these were artifacts from, they were used in a church just around the corner on Baltimore Street. And when the church went out of business in the 1920s, they And there was some controversy about whether or not to actually take these things because they've been used in a church. But the rabbi, Rabbi Avram Schwartz, who's a very prominent, very well-respected rabbi, said there is absolutely no reason why we can't take these, and we should, and there are these we don't have to, so they did. So are there any questions about anything on this? So we can go and take a look at some of the stuff. Yeah. It's such a great question. So what you notice, I'm not actually going to say about so if a service is conducted, and in fact, the way that this lectern is being faced is not how we're facing this, and we can talk about that when we go up front. So, but the congregation, for the most part, when the rabbi gives a sermon, the rabbi will face this way. So, there are some rows of seats that are in front of it, which means for kind of awkward seating. But in fact, it really is a very traditional arrangement, and it comes from a sense that the Holy Scrolls, the Torah scroll, should be read in the midst of the people. So it's a very literal way of moving community. Now, then the group that left Baltimore Hebrew to go listen to them, unfortunately, I don't think we'll have time to see it, but they came up with a different solution. They still wanted to kind of keep the idea of the central bema, but they turned the seats that were in front to the side. So it's like a horseshoe arrangement. So it's not quite as awkward. You know, why don't, actually, that's a great question. Why don't we get up and we'll go to the look? We'll talk about that. One of the things you notice when you come up to this side is if you look up, you can see the beautiful stained glass window with Sir Davis, which is original. It was from 1845. So even if you're new Jewish symbols, when you're facing the building from the entrance that came in, from the other side, you would see this beautiful stained glass window. But right now, what we're standing in front of is called the Ark. This is the cabinet where the Torah scrolls, the scripture stories, the services are kept. In most synagogues, the Ark is placed on the easternmost wall, with the concept that when in the Western Hemisphere we're facing east or facing towards Jerusalem, where it's directed. While the architecture of the Torah Ark changes according to congregation, there are a few things you usually have that are associated with it. One of which is light, an eternal light that stays on at all times, a way of showing that what's inside is important. Our Ark also puts a Hebrew inscription that reads Zav Yipnei Mi Hata Omed, which means no more who you stand. So in essence, it's really the Ark that contains
I'm taking the liberty with this group of being a woman who has a voice, and I know this is a group that I don't need to ask for an apology or forgiveness. I have some special friends with me who are not from Baltimore per se, one of whom, well, Connie and Grace are here, and Connie Learman's daughter, Brooke Learman, is planning on breaking away from her office and meeting us for lunch. This would not normally be worthy of announcement, except that Brooke is one of the most extraordinary, young, progressive, legal minds in Maryland and very involved politically, and she's running for office in Baltimore in District 46. So if you vote in this area, if you have money you want to leave in Brooke's pocket, I promise you it will be spent for every generation beyond us. She would not talk this way about herself. She and her family are just always, and all three of the Connie's young children, not so young children. Oh my!
Right, wow.
All three of the Learman young people are doing the right thing. One is very involved with immigrant rights in the whole through CASA of Maryland. Another one works at the White House. And the third, you're going to have a chance to meet Brooke at lunch. So,
thing I wanted to mention, Linda, where are you? Linda Shavitz, put your hand up. Having been an organizer of programs before, Linda is the program coordinator of all this. She's been working on this for about 6 months. And so I wanted to, if we could give it up for Linda for that. And Ian.
That flew over Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. And we certainly know the story of Fort McHenry, and we know certainly the Star Spangled Banner person who wrote the words and became, of course, our national anthem. So we can be grateful that Baltimore, Maryland has the home of Mayor Pickersgill, who did that so successfully. And certainly recently on the 25th we certainly enacted that through the Maryland Historical Society, and some of you perhaps attended some of the events that celebrated the 380th birthday of Maryland. So we can appreciate all that went into that. So we're traveling west to Charles Street, and there's so much that we could see here in Baltimore. So for those of you who don't get to come as frequently as you might want, you might want to consider some of the new things, the new events that are going on. And I do recall when I came here for college in 1960, of course the harbor had not developed, but fortunately under William Donald Schaefer's mayor, he really pushed forward over 30 years ago to make this section of Baltimore come alive. And it's one of the most visited sites. When tourists come here, they like the harbor for the food, for the social life, for a number of reasons. We can appreciate Baltimore as the largest area in our state, with lots of cultural activities that we can appreciate Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, we just passed the Holocaust Museum, and those of you need to please recall the importance of that location. It's very significant, and we just left certainly the Jewish Museum, and all of this says to us, look at the horrors, look at all of those things that can happen to a people, and yet they overcome and continue to do great things in spite of the horror. And so we can appreciate the Jewish community for keeping the legacy of all that happened to a culture of people and all the greatness that was attained through their efforts. Thank you. Okay, very good. Thank you. There's so much to do here. I remember the ship that you see. Over to you see the top part of it. That ship was built as a navy ship during slavery. That ship was in the Atlantic Ocean and held the colonists who wanted to enslave Africans to bring them here. And so in 1808, that ship was out in the ocean to say no more enslavement coming across the Atlantic Ocean. But of course, much continued underground. But certainly that's a site that you want to tour because that's significant. Tour, yes, the USS Constellation, which is certainly significant in that particular era of horror for a culture of people. Here we can appreciate our science center, we can appreciate our aquarium, and we can appreciate the sports enthusiasts that come for our Orioles. Hopefully they'll have a good year this year. Our Ravens down here, they didn't have a good year, but they've done a lot of trading. They've done a lot of things to get new bodies with skills that's going to help us get back to the Super Bowl again. And certainly when you come to this section of the harbor, you want to think about food as well, the eateries, and all that we have to offer here to have people entertained. Think about all the number of hotels that have been built. When I came here in 1960, very few were down at the harbor. Certainly the Baltimore Hotel was here, but I'm seeing all the ones that were built to accommodate lodging for people who love coming to this city. It has become one of the most significant places that people love to come, eat, and socialize and have a good time. And we're not too far from the expressways that would take us to the airport to bring people in. And so much can be said about the changes over the past 30 years to this section of Baltimore City.